and wait for the harvest, we would be amazed at how many apples we would reap from that one seed. When I look at my peach tree in the backyard, you plant one peach seed, it will give you one peach plant. My peach tree bore so many fruit that it literally started breaking the branch of the tree. I had to mend it. I had to go out there and do surgery on the tree to keep it from stressing out because of the weight of the peaches. I literally had to take a stick and knock peaches off the tree to lighten the load on that tree. If we had, keep one seed, it grows into a tree, and it literally bore hundreds of peaches. See, you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed. I hope I'm making sense right about now. Number one, the measure of more. I want to talk about that. This law brings into our lives the simple truth of the measure of more. And it has been said that the man who has more is the measure of all things. We tend to believe and we live by that. The more money you have, we say, the better off you are, particularly in this capitalistic society that really centers around commerce and money. The more power you have, the better chance you have of getting what you want. That's what we say. The more prestige you have, the better chance you have of going somewhere. I'm going to make sense to you. However, family, we forget the law does not take into account what is better for us. And this is left up to us in how and what we sow. The law only produces a harvest more than what we have sown. It does not guarantee if the more is positive and or negative, because it is dependent on what? What is that which we have sown? But the law says that we will reap more than what we have sown. You plant one peach seed, you get a peach tree that produces hundreds of fruit. Let me give you a biblical example of this in Mark 4. 1 through 8. Let me turn real quick in my word to Mark, the 4th chapter of Mark, verses 1 through 8. Just 1 second. Mark 4 verses 1 through 8. When you get it, say amen, so I can hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Okay. Again, he began to teach about the sea. Such a large crowd gathered around him that he got into the boat and onto the sea, and he sat there while the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land. And he began to teach them many things in parables. And in the teachings, he said to them, listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came up and ate them up. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly. Since it had no depth in the soil, but when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked, and it yielded no grain. Listen, I'm going to go ahead and read the 8th verse. Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30, 60, and 100-fold. And he said, let everyone with ears listen. See, in this parable, Jesus said that the seed that fell on the ground increased. Verses 8. It fell on good ground. A single seed grew to a plant that produced, watch this, 30, 60, or 100 more seeds. Reaping more than what we sow. Listen to me, family. Reaping more than what we sow is fundamental to the laws of harvest. If you cannot beat God's giving, settle that in your mind. Settle that in your mind. That way you will be a little bit more willing to give your offering or your tithe. And when you realize that God takes note of everything that you give up for his sake, and he makes promises about that. He says, whatever you give up for my sake, I will restore 100-fold in this life. That's what the word of the Lord says. He says, and in this parable that I just read, reaping more than we sow is basic. It's a fundamental fact of the laws of harvest. Every farmer lives by this principle, because if his work only produced exactly what he planted in the ground, his labor would be useless. It would be futile. Listen to me. If his work only returned exactly what he put in the ground, his work would be useless, and he really would lose out in earning money for his family as a farmer. He would never, ever gain anything extra with which to feed his family or to sell at the market for a profit. If a farmer got exactly what he planted, he would go broke. He'd have to get another job. Consider this. The potential of one kernel of corn, a seed of corn. One kernel of corn will produce one corn stalk. One stalk of corn. Listen to me, family. On the average, every stalk will produce 3 ears of corn. On the average. Sometimes 4, sometimes 2, but on average, a kernel of corn produces a stalk, which produces 3 ears of corn. And it would have, within the confines of those 3 kernels, those 3 ears of corn, it will produce 250 kernels of corn. So that a single kernel of corn will yield, watch this, a 750% increase. One kernel equals 250 kernels produced from one stalk that has now 3 ears on average. And 250 kernels will yield 750% increase. The harvest, listen, family, is always what God gives you back from your sowing is always greater than the seed you plant. Lord, I'm teaching you something tonight. Whether we are speaking of agriculture, other things of our lives. I just walked over to my neighbor's house. He's a wonderful guy, lives across the street from me, and he's just like me. He loves gardening, and he went over and I just plundered his garden. I got cucumbers, I got tomatoes and peppers. I got some in my own backyard, but he got so many. He was so bountiful. He insisted that I got a bag and picked me some vegetables. But the harvest, and I'm looking at the abundance there in his backyard. We invariably reap more than what we have sown. I know you do, Mustafa. I got you covered. I got peppers for you too. This fact is both serious and it's sobering. Listen to me, y'all. The harvest is also always greater than the seed planted. We're clear on that. Whether we're speaking of agriculture, all the other things of our lives, it relates. The law covers every aspect of your being. We invariably reap more than what we have sown. And the fact is both serious. It's very serious. It's powerful. But it's also sobering. It can be a little bit scary. And it applies equally to the Christian and the unbeliever as well. Whatever a person sows, whether it's good or bad, he's going to reap that right back into their lives. The benefits or the consequences is a significantly greater proportion. Did you hear what I just said? Whatever a person sows, whether it's good or bad, he's going to reap the benefits and or the consequences in a significantly greater proportion. I'm teaching you something. Of course, there are exceptions to this law because we live in a fallen world. A farmer may have his crops destroyed by drought, or we may know that bad things can happen to good people. My peach tree did not produce this year because this is what happened. In early February, it warmed up and it tricked my tree and daffodils as well into thinking it was springtime. And I was sitting there watching them bud, and I was sitting there talking to my branches. I talked to my trees. I talked to my plants. And I said, go back, go back, go back. It's not time for you to come out. You're going to die if you come out too soon because it's going to freeze again. This is February. And so this is the exception, is that we might get an early freeze and it kills all the buds and consequently causes the tree to go dormant again. But this time it doesn't bear flowers and therefore will not bear fruit. But even in this instance, God's law is always set aside. If we look at the whole of life and all the seasons of our lives and the harvests that we encounter over the course of our lives, we will find that a season when you bear no fruit does not the whole story make. Y'all hear me? You no matter who you are, will go through seasons where things ain't working out for you. Things are not good with you. Things are not happening for you. And you can assume from that blip in the screen that things just are not going to work out for you, and that things are bad for you. And we can throw a pity party. We can put on some country western songs and wail and moan and walk around the house in our depression garments. You know, those things that they advertise on TV where people lay around and cover up here. We can wear that all we want to, but the real deal is one season of lack does not the whole story tell. God is up to something in your life when you're doing the right things, but you don't see the bearing of fruit. I told you, my big peach tree, the one that was overwhelming with peaches last year, did not produce but one, O-N-E, one peach this year. And the squirrel came and got that one. But even in these instances, God's law is not set aside, because if we look at the whole of our life and all the seasons of our lives and the seasons of harvest that we have had, and what we will find is that as a general principle, we reap the same in kind as that which we have sown. That's law number 2. We'll get back to that one. And we reap more than we have sown. You hear what I'm saying? We reap more than what we have sown. Number 3, negative reaping of more. Yeah, what you talking about, Bishop? The farmer knows that if you plant inferior seeds or bad seed, he will get an inferior crop at harvest time. And sometimes he get lots of inferior crop. I can hear the words of my mama, because she loved gardening. Verdell can vouch for that. I see you, sis. Mom loved gardening, and we would all have to go work that garden, particularly me and Al. And she would look at the seeds before we plant them, and she would throw away seeds that didn't look right, because she know that if the seed looked bad, the odds increase that the fruit that comes from that seed will have issues too. She would say, you better be careful. You're going to get more than what you bargained for if you plant the wrong seed. And how right she was. How right she was. You know, people that win the lottery, some people, and I'll never forget, one of the first persons that won the Georgia lottery when they implemented the lottery here in Georgia, it was a person that really came from an impoverished life, and when they won the lottery, the best they could see for themselves after having won several $1,000,000 was to buy themselves a double wide. They were happy just to go get themselves a double wide. But there are other lottery winners. I like that. You know, I'm like, save your money. If you can live well on a double wide, do that. But there are some people that allow the lottery money to crush them because they just weren't ready for it. He that soweth in iniquity shall reap vanity. Proverbs 22:8. See, vanity is a Hebrew word that is also translated as iniquity or wickedness or affliction or mischief. Whereas the word translated iniquity emphasizes the deed done, something that was done. And the word translated vanity emphasizes the consequences. We see that twice in Deuteronomy 26:14 and over in Hosea 9:4. And it is translated as a form of mourning, and it is associated with death. The verse is telling us that when a person sows in iniquity or in unrighteousness or in mayhem or storm starters, you know the kind of folks I'm talking about, they reap adversity and sorrow. When people are mean-spirited and bitter, mean-spirited and bitterness comes back to their lives, and they get caught in a vortex, a whirlwind, if you will, and cannot shake themselves out of what is happening in their lives or even their mean-spiritedness, because everything they do is reaping it right back in more than they had given. Lord have mercy. Hosea 8:7 says, "For they have sown the wind, and they reap a whirlwind." Did you hear that? But they have sown the wind, but they reap the whirlwind. Whirlwind represents the harvest in kind that comes from sowing the wind. But it also represents the concept of more. The fact that you always reap more than what you sow. A whirlwind is a tornadic storm. It is a violent, a fierce wind like a tornado or hurricane. Israel's expression of displeasure with God by turning into idols and marrying foreign nations for help and going to them is viewed as sowing into the wind. And God's displeasure, I hope I'm making sense, and resulting judgment that came upon Israel is pictured as a whirlwind. You gotta reap back more than what you sowed. The idea is that you may sow a breeze, but you gonna reap a gale. Luke 6:36, and listen to me. Luke 36 says, "Give and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." Jesus doesn't specify that what is to be given or sown. He just said, give. Whatever you give, it's going to be given back to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And I'll make men come and add it to your bosom. Sometimes they're your enemies. He will make your enemies come and pay you. Jesus doesn't specify what to give, what is to be given or sown. He just promises us that whatever it is that we give, we're going to get it back. We're going to receive it. Remember, you can't plant a banana tree and reap an orange. A similar promise is made in Malachi 4:10 concerning the tithe. A blessing returned so great that there was no room to receive it. Malachi 3:10. I love that. Concerning the tithe, 4:10. Blessing that returned so great that there just wasn't room enough to receive. Remember Jacob in Genesis, verse 44 and 18, all the way up through 45:4. 44:18. Read that in your spare time. Genesis 44:18 up through 45:4. The life of Jacob illustrates for us this fourth truth. As a result of sowing, Jacob reaped the whirlwind of trouble and headache. he caught the Dickens. He and his mama, Rebecca, schemed with Jacob to deceive their father for the blessing of the elder son. Rebecca sent Jacob away for what she thought would be only a few days, but it turned out the boy had to be gone for 20 years. She sent him away. She schemed with him. So Jacob reaped the whirlwind of trouble and heartache for the fact that he schemed and connived to steal his brother's Esau's birthright with his mama's blessing. She thought, go over to Uncle Laban's house and stay there for a couple of weeks and come on back. For a few days, it'll settle down. He had to be gone for 20 years, and Jacob schemed and deceived to get the blessing, and later he would receive in kind and even more from Laban, his father-in-law. What happened? He schemed and manipulated his brother, and what happened, y'all? What happened is that his Uncle Laban pimped him. His Uncle Laban schemed against him. His father-in-law gave him, he had to work 7 years to marry Rachel and was tricked by Laban, and he married Leah instead, the oldest daughter, because she had to get married first, according to Laban. And then he had to work 7 more years to get the woman of his love that he had fallen in love with, Rachel. He had to work another 7 years just to get Rachel. And then Jacob used the skin of a kid goat to deceive his father. Remember that? Esau was the hairy, fuzzy boy, his twin brother. Jacob was smooth and almost effeminate. Jacob used the skin of the goat to deceive his father, and his own dad, who was blind in his old age, was deceived by his son with the goat skin coat that Jacob wore into believing that his son was dead. Proverbs 22:8 said, he who sows in iniquity will reap in sorrow, and the rod of his anger will fail. Check out David over in 2 Samuel 12:19 and 12. You see, David is a well-known example of this law from a negative perspective. He sowed iniquity. Yeah, the man after God's own heart. We deified David, but David had many, many issues. His contrite and spirit, his humbly ass seeking forgiveness, is what knitted him to the person of God, to the heart of God. But he sowed iniquity and he reaped in trouble. What he began as a little wind blew into his own household like a whirlwind. Let's look at the consequences of David's sin. You remember what he did with Bathsheba. When he slept with Bathsheba, got her pregnant, sent her husband to the front lines to have him murdered, thought he had gotten away with it, but the God revealed it to the prophet of God. And David had him murdered. In time, 4 of his own sons died premature deaths. I'm telling you something. 4 of David's sons died premature death. 3 of them died violently. They died from an ignominious death. The illegitimate son, Amnon, Absalom, and Ananias. So the wind reap the whirlwind. We simply reap more than what we sow, good or bad. Positive, sowing positivity and reaping even more. I've said this to my wife, and I say it often. I know that because we are generous people, we give both to our church and to people on the streets. We give. And I believe that is what secures us to reap much more than what we give. We looking into our ledger book, we see this law, like the others, have a positive column, because in a typical apple orchard or peach orchard, plants come, some of the trees, I planted my peach tree, I call it Charlotte, because Minister Charlotte gave it to me. So I planted Charlotte probably 15 years ago. I planted in the front yard first, but she wasn't doing well then. So I dug her up and I put her in the backyard in the middle of the sun so there would be more sun. And she started doing a whole lot better. And as a result, produced just hundreds of peaches last year. Again, this year she only produced one. But in a typical orchard, growers plant some of their trees like I did 15 years ago. And they continuously reap more than they planted in a very positive fashion. Give it a little fertilizer, prune back the limbs each year, give it a little love, and it will continue to give to you. Do you think that they would have planted those trees had they thought that the apple tree, the peach tree, the orchard is not only going to give one fruit once a year? No. That's not how it works. You plant one seed, you get a whole tree full of apples, and you can sell all of those apples for immeasurable profit. And you did that over 40 years ago. And each year it's been giving you fruit. The farmer who sows the seed has an expectation for that seed, a ratio of what that just 1 to 1 is not going to get it. No, they intend to reap much more than what they sowed. They sowed one seed. It produced an apple tree. That apple tree is giving you 200 apples every year for the last 40 years. You got to get me and hear me that Jesus used a parable to tell us that you're going to get more when you sow. It's an immutable fact in God. I'm not begging for your money. I don't need it. Our church does. But this sermon is not about your giving. It's about helping you to understand this Bible study, to help you understand that when you give, there's a mandate on your seed. Lord have mercy. In God, there is a law attached to your giving that says God is going to compound what you gave and give it right back to you the way you gave it. Jesus used the parable of the mustard seed to make clear this point. Listen, on Matthew 13, verses 31 and 32. Matthew 13, 31 and 32. There's another parable. Jesus talked a lot about growing stuff. He put forth to them saying that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. But when it grows, it is greater than the herbs, and it actually becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come now and nest in the branches of this tiny little mustard seed. Is now a tree. One small act of kindness may reap a great act of kindness that you can't imagine. One small hand to help someone out may reap many hands to help. Let me give you an example. I told Exusia this a couple of months ago. I gave somebody a ride. I had this young man that needed to get to his job. He had no way of getting there, no way of getting to his employment. There was a mix-up, and at any rate, there he was desperately begging for me to take him a long ways to his job. And I said, you know what? This kid needs that job. And clearly the employer needed him there because they actually had attempted to pay for him to get there. I don't know what happened with that, but it didn't come to me. That young man, I told him, that's okay. I'll get you there. And so I did. And when he got out of my car, he says, God is going to bless you today for what you've done for me. Family, listen to me. This, it blows my mind when I say it. Within an hour, I looked at my phone and I looked at my account, and there was $1,000 in my account that I did not earn, did not expect, and it was mine. One small act of kindness may reap a great act of kindness in return, and one small hand to help may reap as many hands to help you when you need it as well. Our doing good can reap a harvest that benefits others. Somebody from early Exousia years saw our sermon online last Sunday, and the young man reached out to me and says, "You are still changing lives. But let me tell you how you changed my lives." And he told me the great things that has happened in his life and his family and his kids. He said, "All the things that I was and was doing back then, I no longer do. And I attribute that to the fact that you planted a seed in my spirit." It just made my day. Spiritually speaking, it's time to sow righteousness for a future harvest. I looked at those hearings on television today, and I see one party in this country has gotten to be just so evil and so full of lies. They're just like the person they worship in so many ways. They're so sad, and they are the ones that has created this world in which we find ourselves with a bunch of angry people. Right before we went online tonight with this Bible study, a person right here in Atlanta was driving down the street with her daughter in the car, and someone shot in her car. Road rage. Spiritually speaking, it's time to sow righteousness for a future harvest. Hosea 10:12-13 says, "Sow for yourselves righteousness and reap in mercy. Break up the fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he comes and rains righteousness on us. You have plowed wickedness. You have reaped iniquity. You have eaten the fruit of lies because you trusted in your own ways in the multitude of mighty men." Hosea 10:12-13. I'm going to read that again, and I want you to listen to what the word of the Lord is saying to this current age. Hosea 10:12-13. Write it down. Go home and read it. "Sow for yourselves righteousness, reap in mercy, break up the fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he comes and rains righteousness on you. You have plowed wickedness, you have reaped iniquity, you have eaten the fruit of lies because you've trusted in your own way in the multitude of your mighty men." Is that not America right there? Even in the midst of hardship and heartache, if we were so good, if we would give good, we will reap good. We will reap God's best. Looking back at the life of King David, we see the fulfillment of his law. We cannot forget the fact that David sinned with Bathsheba and tried to cover it up and had her husband killed. And as a result of that, reaped in tragic proportion. 4 of his kids died prematurely, 3 murdered. Tragic proportions, more than they had sown. And it would be wrong to see only the bad and not the good that David sowed throughout his life. But 1 Kings 15:4-5 said, "Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem by setting up his son after him and by establishing Jerusalem, because David did what was right in the eyes of God and did not turn aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite." The son that we're speaking of was, of course, Solomon. Solomon was part of the harvest that came for David. We celebrate Solomon as the wisest king Israel has ever known, the richest man Israel has ever known. David's life of righteousness. Solomon was part of the harvest that came back to David because of his walking in obedience from that time of disobedience, that moral lapse that he had with Bathsheba. 2 Chronicles 7:17-18. puts it like this: as for you, if you walk before me as your father David did, this is God talking to Solomon, and do according to all that I have commanded you to do, and if you keep my statutes and my judgment, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom as I covenanted with David, your father, saying, you shall never fail to have a man as ruler in Israel. Most of David's life was showing good and not evil. So David planted the seeds of repentance. Psalms 51. He asked for forgiveness. And what a wonderful example of the heart that is repentant, a penitent heart. Why is it that important? Because it can turn and it can make a difference in your future. If you know you have sown in discord and ugliness, ask God for repentance. Acknowledge it. Ask God help. Let me speak according to the apple orchard we was talking about, the peach orchard. They planted some of the trees 40 years ago, remember? And I understand that these trees with proper care will produce apples for another 40 years to come. Taken care of, given nourishment. Let me remind you that you sow a thought, you reap an action. You sow an action, you reap a habit. When you sow a habit, you reap character. You sow a character and you reap a destiny. May I add that you sow a destiny and reap a legacy to be left for all of those who come behind you. We sow more than what we reap. You can count on that. You can count on that. Carl McRae, Berta L. McRae, Mustafa Gathers. You may say, I haven't lived right now. I will continue to be punished. Nah. Read Psalm 51. Read it yourself. 2 Samuel 12 and 13 said this. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Bishop, why is that important? Because it can and it will make a difference for your future. Acknowledge it. Let him know he already does. Repent from it. Walk away from it and never look back. That's it. That's your word for tonight, family. I love you. Shonda is putting up the ways you can give to Exousia, and I'm grateful for every penny that you give us, great and small. We celebrate you, each of you individually and collectively. Pray God's blessing on every one of you and your lives and your family, that your village prospers. We want to go to Phoenix City on Sunday. Hope you can make it with us. God bless you and keep you, and cause his light to shine upon you and be faithful unto you. God lift up his countenance towards you and give you peace. Good night.